Well, my name is Sajida Vandal, and we are very fortunate to have with us this morning Dr. Jurgen Wasim Frembgen. Now, I've got an introduction. What I'm going to do is this, that I'm going to first do a little introduction, and then there are two books that we'll be looking at. One of them will be more in detail, and that's the first one that we'll take up. And in the second book, we will just do a little bit of an introduction. And most of the time, he will be speaking. But let me first introduce him. Now, Dr. Wasim Frembgen, he is a cultural anthropologist, an Islamic studies scholar and writer. He served as a professor of history and religion and culture of Islam at the Institute of Near and Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Munich. He was also the curator at the museum there in Munich, and he's also served here in Pakistan at various institutions. He's been teaching both at the National College of Arts, at the Quaid-e-Azam University, and other places. He just told me that he's been here for something like over 43 years. He's been traveling to Pakistan. So I think he knows Pakistan more than many of the Pakistanis will know. He has a real insight into some of the, the more unknown cultural groups. And he's written profusely. He's got several books that he has published. Some of them have been published in Pakistan at the Oxford University Press, and they're available in the bookshops here. The one that I think I would like to mention is probably his last one that he wrote from Pakistan. That was The Friends of God, Sufi Saints in Islam, Popular Poster Art from Pakistan. Dr. Jurgen's seminal work has been The Aura of Alif, The Art of Writing in Islam. That is also a book which is probably available in Pakistan, I think, in the bookshops here. Yeah, that's the unfortunate part of it. He's also written in German. And I'm fortunate enough to have one of his books, which is in German. It is on the hand of Fatima. And it's on the material culture, and it's very, very well illustrated. Although I can't read German, but it's a pleasure to have that book. Dr. Jurgen, the first time I met him was I think it must have been in 1992. He walked into the National College of Arts, and that day there was a lot of, processions on the Mall. There was something that we were protesting about. And he walks into my office, and I didn't know him. He didn't have an appointment. And he says that I'm a German. And I said, what is he doing here, for heaven's sake? And he says, I know that you are closed now, but I have my research, and I will go off to the northern areas. Now, for a moment, I looked at him, and I thought to myself that I hope he doesn't get into a problem. But then, he started speaking in Urdu. So he's well versed in Urdu also. And in those days, he was up in the north doing his research there. The books that we are going to talk about, the first one is Africans in Pakistan. Okay, it's a recent publication, unfortunately not available in the bookstores here, not as yet. But it's been published in 2022 by the Africa World Press. I have had the pleasure of reading it and rereading it. I got a copy of it when Dr. Jurgen sent it to me, and I thought I'll skim through it and get to know what this book is about. But it's something that kind of like pulls you in, and you need to kind of visit and revisit it because there are questions which come to mind immediately. One of the first things that strikes one is the fact that we're talking of a community which has 300,000 people in Pakistan. And I'd never met anybody from that community. At least I think I had never met anybody. But as you start reading it, you realize that yes, you have come across that. And then you kind of like question this thing that how come that we are so blinded, or is this community so invisible? And that is, I think, the real value of the work that Jurgen does, because he brings to the forefront a marginalized group of people that are basically mostly in Karachi. And as you read the book, you start realizing, okay, is this his point of view, or is it the point of view of the people? How does he balance this thing? How does he really find out so much about them? How does he go into this community and get to know them so well? So I'm going to hand over to you with two kind of questions. Okay, this is something that troubled me throughout. That I think in your second book you mentioned the Imi and the Ite. Ite? Am I pronouncing the word right? And this is the thing that I'd like you to reflect upon and talk about that, and also talk about the way you spot what is there in our society, which needs to be investigated, which draws your attention. So over to you.
Thank you, Sajida. One small favor, could we please close the door? That would be fine. It is a bit distracting at times. Yes, but let me point out, Sajida, my first love in Pakistan was Nager, the society in the mountains of the Karakoram. They remained in the shadow also in many ways because people focused the popular interest in Hunza. Everybody knows Hunza across the world, Hunza in Shangri-La and so on. And the people of Longviti, there is a popular myth about it, but the neighbors, where we have the Rakaposhi mountain, the fairy mountain, this has been left in the shadow of knowledge also in Pakistan. And we have now two books in a way, the northernmost in the Karakoram, and then we talk about the Africans in Pakistan at the coastal belt in Makran, Sindh, and particularly in Karachi. And it's right, it's my fascination to find such kind of disprivileged, more unknown peoples. And this is what is ethnography about, I think. So it's, so to speak, these two books which were published last year, we can consider the kind of late work in my sense, because when I came first to Pakistan when I was young, now I've become older. And these are two ethnographic monographs in the classic sense. So they try to portrait, to give a picture of the entire culture, of when we define culture as the sum of all manifestations of life. Then the book on Nager, at the fairy mountain, which is the Rakaposhi, the Nagerkuts of the Karakoram, and I'm proud there are some of them here. It is because the fantastic area is a historical anthropology, whereas the Africans of Pakistan is more a contemporary book about their lifeways and traditions, also informed by history, because there are some colleagues, I might mention them. It's not, although I'm the main author of this book published by Africa World Press, in the US, there are some Karachi-based friends and colleagues, Alia Iqbal Naqvi, who is with us at this ThinkFest, the historian Hassan Ali Khan, as well as the spokesman from the Shidi community in Karachi, Shidi Yaqub Kambrani, and the photographer Akhtar Somro, who is a Sindhi who was growing up in Liari. So they have made important contributions. But it's a fascination. I described that in chapters. In every book there's a chapter, an anthropologist's introduction, which is more subjective. It's about my personal attachment to them, how I, you see, experienced first this kind of new world for me. It was also a discovery for me to come across Pakistanis of African descent in that part. Oftentimes I went to attend the Urs of Kalanda Lachabas in Sevan Sharif, and I'm describing that, how I finally I experienced, I saw a procession of African-descended people going around the Sevan and venerating the Kalandar saint. And this finally brought me to Karachi because I realized these people were pilgrims coming from Karachi, who mostly live in Liari, which is not such a decent territory to work also as an ethnographer or anthropologist. So for the last 15 years, I spent every year 2 times in Liari, in the center in Baghdadi, which is also known as the Karachi's Harlem or Little Africa in a way. Before I was not aware that there are Pakistanis of African descent. And I think there was one voice of a gentleman from Hyderabad. He said, we are stigmatized community, discriminated against. There's this racial bias in Pakistan because of our skin color. We are treated as inferior human beings. But how can people help us, he said, if they don't know that we exist? And that's all about, and I think particularly in the northern part of Pakistan, we are all not aware that there are such a huge, sizable community of people who came from Africa often centuries ago. I mean, the first, we are not sure about it, the written sources are not so clear about it, but there are long-term relations between Africa and the Indian Ocean world since 2 millennia. And of course, since the 8th century AD, since Muhammad bin Qasim came, and there were African soldiers in his army, for sure. We have in the Sindhi treatise, the Chachnama, it is mentioned. So over all the centuries, at least for more than 1,000 or 1,200 years, it is possible that Africans migrated there, were brought mostly by force as slaves who became soldiers, seamen, and different professions. But most of them, of course, they reached the coast of Pakistan in the 18th and 19th century. Most of them came and they settled in Karachi, in Liari, in the outskirts of Karachi, and of course in the whole Makran coast. And they are not all aware about their African heritage in the way that they're really, you see, are proud of an African heritage, because it was a stigma for them also, and they tend to you see, they get in a distance from these African roots. But the Shidi community, those who are called or call themselves sometimes proudly, we are Shidis, or in India, Sidi, they really focus on their African heritage, on their saints, African male and female saints, their ancestor saints, their music, their dance. And there are many who are assimilated into the Baloch society, Afro-Baloch, and some, like the Khaskili, also in the Sindhi society.
I think, you talk about, the way they've managed to keep the memory alive. And, also the syncretic kind of a way that, the religions have kind of come together, or whatever the belief systems were. I found that fascinating. And also,
Sufi Islam has also taken roots there.
yeah, and when you think about the Africans, the music is very much a part of their whole culture, And then you find that here they've been able to carry that, keep that part of their culture so intact.
You asked me also, I want to also to answer your first question. I mean, what brought me close to discover this community and the signs of curiosity? An ethnographer, anthropologist who is doing participant observation, which is our method, our way of working, is not to work always with written sources. Of course, we also have, but we have to mingle with the people. We have to immerse in a community, and that takes time, of course. A phase of orientation, one has to make friends, to build up a network. And that was always, I was driven by this sense of learning from people, sitting at their feet, if possible, becoming their friends over many years. So one has to return. Anthropologists who do their 1 year full circle, 1 year ethnographic fieldwork, but they never show up again. This is something I think is not the right way. One has to get back, to return, and to get old with them probably as well, to share memories with them. And I'm fascinated by the warm-heartedness in general of Pakistani people, because in Europe people ask, why are you going to Pakistan for your life? And what is about that Pakistan is driven by radicalization of hardcore Muslims, it's a hard country. And so I say, what do you think? There's so much beauty in Islam, so much about aesthetics like music also to be discovered. And that brought me close, music with these African drums, the big congas, it calls the Mugarman. And the voice of this drum, of this African drum, which is really the sound of Central Africa, East Africa, is the voice of their ancestor, Saint Bavaror. And those who are into jewelry probably among you, if you go here in Lahore, there are jewelry markets where you can purchase ringstones. Ask for the Babagori. Babagori is a stone derived from that African saint because he was an agate trader in Gujarat. It is an agate with an eye motif, and this is called after this saint. So that's not that far away. We simply don't know. And I mean, we should increase our knowledge about such neglected communities, forgotten communities, stigmatized communities, those who have been in a way a bit in the shadow, like the Nagerkuts as well in Karakoram. And yeah, this is my plea for reading books, hopefully physical books too, because there's another way of reading physical books than just digital text. It goes more into a deep reading if you have an haptic experience of a book, but this is another topic, okay. But just allow me this. And yeah, in that way, reading, and talking with people.
There's a community in India, in Gujarat as well, and there's lesser in numbers than in Pakistan. And, there's no, I'm curious about this, that did they come from the Sindh into the Punjab at all,
Not to my knowledge, no. I mean, these Africans were brought by force, through slavery, enslavement. They were brought in a young age, lured to go to the ships. They were by force taken, and their roots were cut, and they were taken away from their families. Therefore, also there is a lack of knowledge about their roots in Africa in that way. But they must have brought the memory of their drums, of their music, their rhythms, their memories, their myths, also songs play a prominent role. So it's about the history, of course, how these people reached over the centuries, the coast of Balochistan, the Makran coast, the coast in Sindh, but there was a slave market in Karachi, and they were sold there still in the 19th century. It was close to Lee Market in Liari, and they reached Gujarat as well, but they never went further to the north. There are American scholars who focused on the history of Shidis or Siddhis in India, who became famous commanders in the army, particularly in the south, in Hyderabad, in the Deccan, in the 16th, 17th, 18th century. They were They became war commanders, some even viziers of the state. They had even their own small states in India also. So this history is quite well researched, although, as you know, yes, you mentioned, the community is quite small. There are 40, 50, 60,000 people. And nobody was aware thus far that there are around 300,000 people, probably. Maybe there are 200,050 or something, with African roots, although not all of them are really aware about or practice these kind of ancient rituals. This is only among the Shidi community and also some Afro-Baloch, of course, but others you see with physical African features, and they would say, yes, we must have come from Africa, but no, we don't play this music, we don't go to the shrines of these male and female saints. There's a lot of gender equality among the Shidis, right? This Bavaroa had a sister,
Yes,
a sister,
exactly.
the mother Egypt, Mai Mishra, and there's so interesting things in that way, and a lot of female saints and male saints, so the women are really more empowered there also. And it's quite interesting.
You know, sometimes you see these zikris, you know, community which comes in, and I've seen them also down in Chandanpur, for example, which is now South Punjab. And your book mentions that this is also, you know, these.
The
You
Zikri
know,
Baloch,
yeah.
Zikri Baloch, yeah.
So there are probably coming down here, maybe with the Sangh Mela.
But the Zikri is a particular sect, of course,
Yeah.
within the Shia fold also. And there's some of the Shidi, of the African descended Shidis, as they call them, which means Lord in effect, or Sir. Yes, they are also they're venerating Sufi saints, right, of the Rifai Silsila, and other popular saints of Sindh, of course, they are there. And the Shidis are mujawer, custodians of the shrines, because they are people in between, sitting on the threshold of shrines, because they are strangers in Pakistan in the very first way. They're considered seen as different due to their physical features, so they are ideal people to mediate between two worlds, also between the magical world, the otherness. So many of them, or some of them, are magic healers, like shamans. I befriended one, but this is in this German, this narrative written in German language, Bambasa Street. Yeah. So this is about a magic healer.
But over this 15 years that you've been now, you know, doing your research, were there, you know, any changes that you noticed? I mean, cultures to change, and you know this.
Yeah, I mean, among the Shidis, my experiences from the last 12, 13, 14 years, many more have become educated, the young population. There are some speaking English. So the book is also intended to be read by them, not only by scholars of the academia in that way, and they should have a source book to get back to their own roots, histories, myths, and rituals. So, and maybe if you allow, I could read a short paragraph from the afterword, because I would also love to talk a little bit on the other book as well in Nager, particularly as there are Nagerkuts among us, as I see, and from that area of Gilgit-Baltistan. So I'm just reading there. From the afterwards, it's in Pakistan. Again, if you go on the net and Google my name or simply the title Africans in Pakistan, anybody who has a sort of, who is in the position to order a book through Amazon or with a credit card, it's available. And I read, the Shidis' distinct African artistic expressions, their music and dances, their particular African-derived religious beliefs and practices merged with indigenous Sufi Islam, as well as their own perspectives of history, and these should be valued and preserved. From the perspective of an ethnographer and cultural anthropologist, they constitute a significant contribution to the cultural kaleidoscope and spiritual wealth of Pakistan. In fact, in many respects, the community's cohesion depends on the maintenance of their religious identity and cultural roots. Muhammad Siddiq Musafir is a famous educationist among the Shidi population whose father came as a slave from Africa to Sindh. He clearly reminded his people in his writings, he was a journalist, Siddiq Musafir, and a writer, a historian, and he reminded his people not to lose touch with the traditions and to pass on their African heritage to the next generation. And I think this is true for many minorities or peoples of Pakistan, that they should value their own distinct history, like also Punjabi language, of course, which is also sometimes not given the credit, and diplomats prefer to speak in Urdu or English and
yes,
neglecting their Punjabi heritage.
Yeah. That we have here.
Yeah.
So do you want to move on to your, before you move on to your second book,
Okay.
Can I just ask you one last question? That on the book on the Africans in Pakistan, are you still working on that subject? Are we going to expect another book a few years later, or?
That sense of eagerness to find new topics, this propelled me in another direction, because I wrote this accompanying volume, this narrative also about the background of the Shidi community, about Liari, which was not easy in certain years. You know, it was 2008, 9, 10, 2014, it was sometimes a no-go territory in Liari to move there. The area was closed off. I had to sneak in. I always went alone without any companion. So it was a bit tricky at times, particularly in the nighttime, to return to my place also. And that is another adventure story I could tell. But no, I think I did whatever I could on this topic, and I'm looking towards new challenges now.
But your the other book, the Rakaposhi one. Mm-hmm. Now that one, I think when I read that, I thought, my God, this is a very lonely existence for an anthropologist. Your research work in these remote areas, and finding now this group, which is what, 60,000 people. And there are much smaller groups there. I mean, we were working with the Kalash, there are only 4,000 of them. And, the fact that you talk about the languages and they've managed to retain 3 language groups there.
Sajida, why are certain groups become so prominent? The Kalasha. I mean, this is a group of 10 to 15,000 people, 6,000 among them still pagan in the way. Of course, there are sometimes more anthropologists than Kalasha living there. They're very well known in that way as those who have still figures of deities. And so they come into prominence. And if I look to Nager at the population and these people living at the foot of the fairy mountain Rakaposhi, which is such a beautiful mountain in terms of space and height and dignity, is about 7,788 meters high in the Hunza Nagar Valley. And there is so much light has been thrown on Hunza, on their neighbors, their former arch enemies, I have to mention. And there's again this discrimination that the scholars as well as the tourists, they were only listening to the voices of the Hunzakuts, of the Hunza people, and they said very negative and bad things about Nager. And this was my first article I wrote in 1983 on the negative prejudices about the Nagerkuts. Nagerkuts means Kuts is the suffix people from Nager. And I also make sure somehow it is of course derived, the term of this, it's an area, it's a region, and it had been a former kingdom. I don't use the term principality because there were more than 550 principalities all across South Asia and the Indian subcontinent, but the kings of Nagar and Hunza, they were sacral kings. It was a sacral kingdom. The king was needed to initiate essential rituals in the life of the people, in ceremonies of sowing and harvest. So it has a whole, it's a ritual kingship in that way. It was essential. And the kingdom was abolished in 1972. Up to that time, it was really a traditional society with an enormous, rich festival calendar in that way, annually. And I worked as an ethno-historian among them, trying to reconstruct the history of settlement, the process of settlement of each and every village, not only giving credit to what the ruling family told me or put into text as well in their shijara and their historic treatises, but listening to the old people. Because in Pakistan, it's like in everywhere, the older population, there are treasure houses for knowledge, masters of knowledge. And I'm very happy one of these masters of memory who is still younger but keenly interested is among us, Safdar Hussain Barsha Saab. He is coming from Uyum Nager, and he became one of the sources for me to fill some, to find answers to certain questions also. And an anthropologist working there, he relies on cooperation with people there, and I was very happy to find that. In the first way, I came as a young man, so I was not yet so sure about my work, but that was done in a kind of German-Pakistan tradition of research in that area. You might remember there had been a Pak-German study group headed by Professor Ahmed Hassan Dani, the famous archaeologist and historian, and my teacher Karl Yetma, who devoted his entire life to research on the northern parts of Pakistan. And it's a rich ethnic mosaic there. Yeah. I could still also go on. You think on Nager you have some question also, or it is based on history, on folk life. It is also a chapter on food and cuisine as well, on rituals, on daily life, and material culture, the arts.
Yeah. One of the questions that I had was this, the artificial glaciers. I thought it was so relevant, and I'd been looking at it in the Kaplu just this last summer, and that's the first time I heard about it. And they call it the marriage of glaciers. And then suddenly in your book, I read about that, and I said, of course, like what you mentioned, that there are little differences, in different parts of the northern areas, and how they exactly kind of. But did you visit the source of it ever, or?
I didn't. So it's about the merging of glaciers, called also male and female glaciers, because it's an area artificially irrigated by glacier water, because this deeply cut canyon of the Hunza Nager River, this water can't be used for irrigation. It's much too low in that way and strong. So the villages are on moraines of glaciers built on a terrace. There's also a terrace, irrigated terraces with wheat and maize and barley. Barley was the most important crop there. There's a ritual meaning also. And I call that area of the Nagerkuts, call their area also in old sources the land of golden apricots. Because the river there, the Nagar Sinda, is rich in gold also. And the ruler of Nagar and the Nagerkuts had to become gold washers, and that was a tribute paid to the Maharaja of Kashmir. So gold also stands out, in particular in Nagar, as well as the apricots. There are more than 33 varieties of apricots in Nager because it is rich, it is a fertile soil. It's not as harsh as in Hunza, where the people sometimes have to starve. But in similar ways, they have a wonderful, peaceful, rural life there. And it's the beauty of that area has always been mentioned by travelers, even by those who have repeated these negative prejudices. Of course, that was all rubbish, these prejudices, and the most warm-hearted people I met there. And
talk a little bit about the women in that area. I mean, were they visible? Were they just?
as far as women are concerned, you see, it was more easily to talk with women in Punjab. And also among the Shidis, among the Africans in Pakistan, I had more the chance to talk to ladies there. But in Nager, it was gender segregation, so it was, during my field work, 3 times I talked very briefly to women when I've lost something also, or I greeted them. No, that was not possible in a way.
So how do you fill that gap, in your?
I confess to that. Two places in the book that there is a lack of knowledge, and this is a one-sided perspective by a male researcher. I'm reflecting this, of course. But on the other hand, men, and particularly the elders, were preserving the knowledge. This was always their way to preserve the historical knowledge if it comes to the process of settlement, about the knowledge handed down from the forefathers, about from where were they migrating to Nager. They came from the south, from different areas. And that was my painstaking work as an ethno-historian who tries to reconstruct the own indigenous history, the folk history of the Nagerkuts, to ask them, where were your forefathers coming from? Of course, the young generation has often even forgotten the affiliation of their own clans. They don't know who we are really, or how is our lineage name. So, of course, Safdar Hussain Thaap made a difference. There are certain masters of knowledge who are keenly interested in this, and my work is also based on this.
And these masters of knowledge that you talk about, are they like a separate group of people, or is it just people who are, like knowledge bearers?
They have a knowledge, they are themselves really keenly interested. They became guardians of their traditional history. I had the fantastic chance in the early 80s, when I came first in 81, 82, so for 6, 7 years, I went every year to Nager, later also. So I have many research visits there. And I could talk then to the older generation. And those people had still experienced the traditional time when the ruler was there, when all the traditional festivals in the year were practiced, namely until 1972. So 10 years later, I was there and could talk to them. Now, all my key informants, and I have mentioned them, around 40 ones, they are listed also, they have all passed away. And Safdar Sahab, you said that at Abdullah from Uyumnagar Chamaling, that he also unfortunately passed away, you'll see. The last one as well. Guardians and treasure houses of knowledge.
And you, of course, have only found the men of knowledge, but no women of knowledge. But okay, that's understandable. But
has to be research has to be done by younger Pakistanis.
Yes, they must go. You must have women out there doing this research as well. But these are oral cultures basically. And I've come across this thing in the little bit of work that I've been doing, that much of that the knowledge is retained in poetic form. So you come across these songs that we have collected in Cholistan, which are like medicinal, which give you medicinal knowledge. Or there's one song on the drying of the Hakra River, which used to be flourishing there about 3,000 years back. And it recaptures all of that in this poetic form, and therefore you're able to transmit from generation to generation. So how was it here?
Luckily, there were German scholars like Georg Budrus and Hermann Berger, both passed away, famous German linguists who worked in the area among Shina, those people speaking Shina language, we call them also the Dardic peoples, as well as among the Burushaski speaking Hunzukuts and Nagerkuts. And they worked on the traditional knowledge. There is a 3-volume major work by Professor Berger about the Burushaski language. They collected texts, and there are songs as well. And when I went there in the 1980s, I was staying in Uyum, in the villages of Uyum Nagar, which was the former capital of Nager, and in Askordas. The people were very fond of their own Burushaski songs, and they were tape recording them as well. So they had singers, narrators, oral epics. The famous Kisar Nimas, the famous Central Asian epic about the hero Kesar, is known in Nager and Hunza and in Tibet as well. So it's a very rich wealth there, and the experts have also worked on that. Should I read 2-3 sentences from the afterword, and then we open the floor for discussion? Right. That would be fine, okay. Because I have to say, this is an historical anthropology. I'm interested in the traditions, of course, many of whom of these traditions are no more practiced now in the last decades. There has been a tremendous socio-cultural change in the Hunza Nagar Valley due to the building of the Karakorum highway, finished in '78. So a lot of new influences, also from down country, come to this place. And my work is a reconstruction of the past before 1972. This work on the Nagerkuts, I read, is not meant to transfigure tradition, to glorify the olden times when people shared basic values and assumptions about life embedded in a culture marked by a remarkable intensity in terms of the richness of its traits, or to lament a lost world in which everyday life in this rural society was meaningful. Life before 1972 in Nager, that is to say, before the period of immense transformation, did not mean living in a perfect world, but of course entailed the trials and tribulations of life. Even today, the land of gold and apricots is a quiet place in comparison to the busy life in neighboring Hunza or in the noisy, booming city of Gilgit. What I do hope is that this book will enable young, educated people, many of whom nowadays flee from the simplicity of Nager's rural life, to rediscover their own roots, to recollect myths, traditions, and folk life of the past, and in this way to appreciate the value of their ancestors. It is a truism that one needs to know one's history in order to understand the present. And I call it, that is my last sentence now, although Nager is derived from the Sanskrit word Nagar, like Krishan Nagar here in Lahore, or there are so many Nagars all around in India and Pakistan. The own pronunciation in Burushaski language is Nager, Nagerkuts, Nageric culture, and therefore I use it to emphasize this distinctness of this culture. Thank you.
So I think let's open the floor for discussion now. And I hope somebody is going to respond to your call for more people to come and do some further research on this.
The question was the language links to Africa, no? Thank you, Amardeep.
Yeah, and so, from that will come my next question.
Interesting things that we have some information that in historic sources also from the colonial period, that was somebody like Sir Richard Burton, the famous Richard Burton, who was in Sindh, that he even collected African words among the Shidis and the Afro-Baloch. And there was still a kind of vocabulary of Swahili words. It's about the language they brought from Africa was Swahili, the lingua franca of the East African coastal belt in that way. But of course, among the younger generation nowadays, the last decades, it has gone down. There are only few old women, not men, old women who who know Swahili words. And I could talk to old women there, knowledgeable guardians of their culture. I use pseudonyms to protect their personality. One is Appa, a famous female ritual leader. And I learned some more Swahili words from her. They are used in the ritual context in religion. These male and female saints, the rituals, they still practice almost sometimes every week. They have their small astanas, small shrines, larger shrines, particularly in Karachi, not outside, because it depends on the availability of music also. On these drums, there is only one last drum maker in Tata who knows how to make a mugarman from mango wood, and then the skin has to be from a camel neck. And the voice of this mugarman drum is supposed to be the voice of Bavaroa, the patron saint. Wonderful. It's a sacred drum.
So, if you can just add on to that question. So you made a point that these slaves, they all came in as slaves, as army and, slaves.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking through that, today we are all slaves of, not that slaves in the old term 200 years back, but slaves of politics or of economy. We're all slaves, right? And either politics or economy is displacing us around the world. I mean, I look at myself, my forefathers are from here, got displaced into Uttar Pradesh, and then I've gone to Singapore. And we're looking at our generations in pockets who are also slaves, and economy is taking them across. Is there any hope for us 200 years down the line to be able to save our identity? When I look at these anthropologically studied communities, right, where you find everything's vanished and gone, and our languages are also getting dispersed. Is there any hope of us to be able to save 200 years back? As an anthropologist, I want your view.
But you see, the destiny of these people, of the African descended people, it hasn't changed. They are still in miserable conditions. They don't get better jobs, very few of them. So they are not out of their misery in a way. And they still face a lot of prejudices, and they don't see a light for them, actually. And they don't see prospects for their future. They try to have communities where they are supporting themselves, giving them education in a way, but there is hardly any support from the government to. Yeah.
My question was more about, as an anthropologist who's studying these communities and how languages in 200 years and the cultures have all got vanished, we as communities are getting displaced under slavery of a different kind today, right? And do our generations, you see, will have any hope to be able to protect our cultures, our languages? That's the question about it.
Again, I would say it depends on an awareness to realize where one's roots are, or to preserve the identity, to read in any case, and to become interested not only in the new global lifestyles and all that kind of globalized lifestyle which is shown to us on the internet, not to delve into that and to get lost there. What, by the way, happens to young people in Pakistan, in the remote northern parts of the country as well. They sit there with their smartphones and they tend to forget their own history, or no more interested in that. What does it count for? But I think it's up to go into a library and also to become interested in one's own history. And in that case, then tradition can be preserved. As, for instance, these Muhammad Siddiq Musafir, the big educationist, already encouraged his people. So I do have this hope, but it's always just a minority of people who are intellectual people who go into this. But even simple people, they have their interest in foodways is, of course, always something, the last anchor. If I see the Punjabi Sikh communities in Germany, for instance, and food brings them together.
But would you not say that language is a major vehicle of culture? And for people who give up their language, like, for example, Punjab has effectively given up Punjabi, our part of the Punjab, so you will lose a lot of the culture. We do not teach that in schools. We do not have that at university. So we're losing all the folk stories, all the proverbs. Everything's getting lost. So people do make a concerted effort to try and keep that alive. And I think those of us who are from the Punjab and sitting here know that we have lost that.
Okay, and probably we have some more language questions also.
Thank you very much indeed. As usual, you have taught me so much which I didn't know. About the question of language, Punjabi. It is the Punjabi upper classes, the middle classes, etc., in the urban areas which have given up on Punjabi for the greater part. But there is a huge rural area in Pakistani Punjab which has not. So actually, it would probably be a little pessimistic, let's say, to imagine that even the Pakistani Punjab has given up on Punjabi. As far as Indian Punjab is concerned, there is actually a lot of emphasis on Punjabi. It's a cultural marker, an identity marker, etc. It's even taught in schools officially. There are newspapers in it, etc. It is taught in higher education also. So I think you're right about the middle classes, of course. But I think we should be a little more optimistic about the future of Punjabi at the moment. Although one can't predict the future, but perhaps a little more optimism. Thanks very much.
Because we're running out of town.
Question about material culture, and you mentioned just a little bit, you touched upon aesthetics and jewelry, and that got me thinking about the folk knowledge in my family about Firoza and Akik, how it's meant to calm the heart and cool the spirit. So how do communities maintain visual and material markers of identity? It would be very interesting. And I'm an anthropologist as well, so.
Of course, the importance of ring stones, the whole symbolism, the knowledge of the healing properties of stones, which is around Pakistan definitely. I did some research in Lahore. There is an article in the handbook of Sufi studies, or Sufi handbook in Netherlands with Brill in print, and it's an encyclopedia of Sufism edited by a French colleague. And there will be an article on ring stones, on the value of ring stones, focusing on Pakistan. But the same knowledge was very much around Nager and neighboring areas in the north. Up to the 1980s, when I was there, the young man had semi-precious stones in a kind of taweez around their neck. And when I saw them 2 years ago, I was there. It was visiting again Uyumnagar. I hardly saw the people anymore. It's no more fashionable, modern in that way. And that knowledge has also gone down in that way. And let me again, because we are almost concluding, I'm so happy that some of my friends from Nager came here. I feel really honored because this work is because of them. If they are the Africans, the Shidis, or the Nagerkuts, or any other people, as anthropologists, we have to deliver in the way, we have to share the results of our research and knowledge, and this is most important. We should not only take something, we have to give something. So.
One last question, and then we wrap up. Okay?
About your book for Africans in Pakistan, when they did come to Pakistan, during Omani rule or before that, and what about their religion?
Before and later, you see, we have some fragments of history that they came in the 14th, 15th century, 16th century. Over the centuries, more information is available in the 18th, 19th centuries when there was Omani rule at Gwadar, certain parts, and we have Baloch living in Oman as well, of course. And there were Baloch even going to the East Africa in the transport business there. So there were trade relations to East Africa, always via Zanzibar, which is derived from Zanj, the name for blacks in quotation marks. And there were just remnants of religion they brought with. But of course, the belief in these saints, the names and the concepts of these male and female saints were brought together to Pakistan in that way. And their rituals, their songs, their oral literature was brought with them, their sense for music and dance as well.
So I think we've run out of time. Do we have time for a lot? Are you in charge out here? Yeah. Can I give the mic there? Okay. आप पकड़ लें.
Thank you so much for your talk. You mentioned the Dardik people. So I just wanted to know, is it a real ethnic group? Is it an ethnonym that is used by any of the cultural groups? Or is it just a figment of colonial political imagination?
There has been, thank you, to raise that question. Yeah, of course it is a contested term, Dardic peoples. It has, as following the historian and anthropologist and Karl Yetmar, it has roots in antiquity, the Darde people. So there is a term, the Dars and Dardic peoples, Dardai, mentioned in ancient sources, ancient written sources. It is not a term used by the people, of course. It is one of the designations. The same problem is, by the way, with the Africans in Pakistan. There are ethnonyms allowed, self-defining terms, there are labels, and Dardic is a problematic term. We are on the safer side if we say these are speakers of the Shina language. Usually they are called after the region, Chilasi people, Gilgiti people, Punyali or Bagroti people, but they all speak the Shina language, which is the largest Indo-Aryan language spoken in the north. And beside Kovar, for instance, it's important. And then we have the unique Burushaski, spoken by people in Yasin, Hunza, and Nager. But yes, Dardic is a kind of conventional terms among scholars. Last year we had a conference in Rome of all those academic colleagues working on the Hindu Kush and Karakoram, for instance. So it's a long tradition in that way. And somehow one needs sometimes kind of conventional terms. But yes, the ancient roots, it had probably this term, and I believe it is even mentioned in one of the rock inscriptions on the Karakorum highway. I mean, this is this fantastic discovery of rock art and rock inscription at the Karakorum highway, which is now in danger that some of the major sites of these rock carvings are going to submerge through the building of the Basha Dam there, or they are destroyed by more kind of radical people who have this kind of uniconic worldview in a way. But thanks for the language.
Thank you.
And this had been discussed in scholarly papers as well, the problematic term. Thanks for making this point.
Thank you then, formally. Okay, I've got it back. Thank you so much, Jurgen, for this two wonderful books. I hope that we will find them in the bookshelves in Lahore, because they are really worth a read. And they're just packed with knowledge. So thank you so much for this morning's thing. And thank you all of you.